agenda for the folks who are listening in or watching in on the live stream. But it's a really quick agenda. This was the fifth and final meeting. It was the kind of holdover meeting just in case, we needed to use the meeting and the space reserved for the meeting so that we can, clean up any other conversations, tie up any other conversations that we hadn't got to yet. So we'll do a little bit of kind of clean up through that. The items, we'll talk about items that were identified for discussion today. Things like continuation of the municipal information booklet recommendation review, petition thresholds, fiscal and operational impacts of change, and do a review of the recommendations that I have submitted as the clerk based off of the input that we've had here. And we'll go kind of through that later. Then we'll have that public comment period that Amelia had just described. And then we'll adjourn and wrap up, and we'll just go from there. At the top, the ballot measures to change the city charter or the muni code can be put in the Denver municipal ballot through either a citizen initiative process and also by the Denver City Council referral process. Both processes are inconsistent, and the timing is often condensed, which can limit public engagement, council discussion, and analysis. The Ballot Access Modernization Committee, this is the committee, the BAM committee, will examine the processes, identify challenges, look at best practices, including the state level. We consulted with experts, and we've engaged with community members to explore opportunities for improvement using a fair and open process. And this is the statement that we created in the beginning for the folks that are watching. In terms of the purpose of the BAM, we want to be clear, and I want to actually clear the air and clarify that we are working towards using the input from this committee to inform the recommendations for our office. So, and I apologize if my voice isn't this as usual and familiar as I had lost it. I had fought a really, really bad cold 2 weeks ago, and it's still stuck around this way. Hopefully it's not permanent. We understand that there are others who understood the purpose of this committee to create its own formal recommendations. So, we have already provided a draft of bills of recommendations from my office, and we're going to continue to refine those. We've sent those to you, but we also want to do recommendations from this committee to include more voices, those options, and then recommendations as well too. That way we can kind of tie everything up and summarize, from this process, being that this is his last meeting. So there you have it. Know that the information that I sent you and some of those kind of run through is what I sent this to the council members as well too for their consideration. If it seems a little backwards, it's because we had scheduled the council process to start last week. And I think, knowing that we had this extra meeting available to discuss anything that we haven't discussed yet, or to close things up or close any kind of loose discussions up, I think, was a timing issue. So know that the council members have what you have in front of you, and those can be refined based off of the conversations that we have today and any input that you'd like to have going forward. I didn't know, Councilwoman Black, I don't want to take up all the time, but I'll also turn it over to you as the co-chair for your opening comments, and welcome.
Well, thank you everyone for your service. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate the discussions we've had. The agenda is slightly different than I thought it was going to be. I thought we were talking about signature thresholds today, but whenever we're ready to begin, that's fine with me.
Okay. Well, Councilwoman, there's those two items that are up for discussion today, and I, based off of some conversations, we went back, looked at our notes, looked at all the different conversations that were had. I have two things on there. So the petition thresholds are on there. So, so first things first, and it's a little backwards on the agenda. So I didn't know if there was anything, Councilwoman, I added some things that I think you wanted to either rehash or not brought up yet in regards to the continuation of the municipal info booklet that we have, the AKA the Denver Blue Book. If there was anything else that you wanted to review.
Well, we didn't finish the discussion on the 21st of April. So if you want to do that, I can pull up my slides from that meeting.
for the blue book.
Yeah. Or if you want to, yeah, I've not seen this presentation, so whatever you want to do.
Okay. Well, why don't we do this? So why don't we get into, and I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to rehash in terms of the information of the blue book. If there was
Like
anything.
I said, we did not finish that conversation. I was not planning to talk about it, but I do have my slides from the last meeting that I can bring up. I haven't seen this PowerPoint, and like I said, I wasn't aware. I thought we were talking about signatures today. So.
We are going to talk about signatures today. So this is just kind of wrapping up any other loose ends on any other conversations. And I know that based off of the notes and based off of the conversations that we had, that there was still some hanging discussions on the information booklet. So, one was the ideas for fiscal analysis. So recommending fiscal analyses earlier in the process to allow for translation, for printing and mailing. Ideas for adding fiscal analysis to petitions, and the pro con statements with that. I know that part of the discussion point was a recommendation from my office to allow the acceptance of both pro and con statements earlier in the process for translation, printing, and mailing, because right now we allow the folks who are the authors of the initiative to be able to submit their pro comment, but then we also allow anybody who is anybody in the public who wants to submit a con statement in the blue book as well too. This would be to allow both pro and con.
Well, I'll just say that having the fiscal analysis earlier doesn't necessarily work with council referred measures, because council generally refers the last Monday in August, because it has to be 60 days before the election. And with the Labor Day weekend, it ends up being the last Monday in August. And so to have the fiscal analysis done earlier is hard for the Department of Finance. One of my other ideas related to the ballot information booklet was for council to have some discussions on actually moving up our timeline. So there's more timing for all of these things earlier in the summer. And since we didn't get to talk about that, that was an additional topic that I was going to have council discuss later this summer.
Sorry, Sky Stewart from the mayor's office. You're welcome, and your hand is up. Go ahead.
Thanks, Clerk. Councilman Black, I think got to this point, and I know Steve from Department of Finance is on as well, so I don't want to speak for him, but that was kind of my initial thought when I saw the recommendations that your office made. Is there's a gap there of, if you move back to 75 days before the election and council hasn't yet finished their timeline for referral. So either you have to move those timelines together or it doesn't really work. It's already a really tight timeline for finance to do that analysis with the current deadlines when things are being referred right up till the 60-day mark before elections. So it's impractical and infeasible, I think, on the Department of Finance's part, unless we are also changing all of the deadlines for council referral alongside that. So just a practical matter that I think would need to be taken into consideration.
Point well taken. Thank you, Sky. Audrey Klein, and then Kevin Flynn.
Thank you, sir. And I think Sky really hits on part of the conversation that we haven't had is possibly how to tie some of those things together. I know the councilwoman had talked about possibly changing the sort of deadlines for council to refer. So I think if that is still on the table, I think there would be some interesting ways to maybe tinker with this. And I'd be thrilled to continue conversations if that's still an option. Just know we're open to whatever could give us a little more breathing room to make sure that we're translating and printing on time.
Okay, Councilman Flynn.
Thanks, Clerk Lopez. Yeah, I would agree with the notion that the council ought to discipline itself to push back our deadline and not be referring things at the last minute if we're going to demand a rigorous fiscal analysis from the Department of Finance on if we're going to require those citizen initiatives, we should require it of ourselves first. So I'm definitely on board with pushing back our deadlines to meet a very rigorous and detailed process. So remember, the purpose of this is that voters understand what they're voting on. And when we put things on the ballot at the last minute, I don't think that serves the purpose. So I'm on board with pushing it back. Thanks.
Thank you. I want to make sure there's any other hands out here. Mr. Steve Bond, I know that you're on here, and I think the Department of Finance was brought up mentioned a couple times. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything from a staff perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Clerk Lopez. I appreciate it. But Sky is correct, and the timeline is short as it is, and to move it up would really cause us a lot more. We just have to really delve into it a lot quicker and work on it. And what I am concerned is, considering that we have to have so many sign-offs before it does go to your office, I'm just concerned that we might not be able to meet that deadline because we want to make sure that all parties that have a vested interest in it have time to review it and make recommendations before we send it to you guys.
Okay. I don't know, Councilwoman Black, I know we talked about this before, and you mentioned this before about council considering its own rules in terms of when the deadline and shot clocks are created for referrals.
Yeah, we're going to have that discussion at one of our budget and policy meetings in June.
Okay.
Talk about creating some rules around referring ballot measures. So it's something that I feel strongly about. I don't think we should be waiting until the last Monday in August. I think it should be done earlier. So that is something that we will be discussing. And based on what Councilman Flynn just said, and he's nodding his head, that I think that he agrees with me. So hopefully we'll have a good discussion about that amongst council members.
Helpful for us too. So talk amongst yourselves, do your thing. That would help us as well. Now the other portion, I don't know if there's anybody else in the group in the BAM. Any questions regarding this before we move on to the next? Okay, so the next point of discussion for the blue book was the idea of adding those fiscal analyses to petitions when the petitioners actually file, and when they get their petition, that there'd be a fiscal analysis attached to those. I want to make sure that we don't ignore any kind of input from the BAM or not have any time to. I'm sorry, that we don't gather input from the BAM. I want to make sure you guys have the opportunity to, with that idea. Audrey, I know you probably have a little bit more detail in terms of how this would work for us, or Councilman Black. Now you have your hand up. I'm sorry, you're on mute, Councilwoman.
Back to the previous discussion, there was not a lot of discussion, but I just want to be clear, is the group recommending that we look at moving these deadlines earlier? I just want to get a feel for if this group has consensus on making that recommendation, that we look into it. Obviously, we wouldn't know the details at this time, but as a general principle, is this group on board for that?
You raise your hands if you want to indicate or nod your heads.
I'm going to raise my hand because I do think it's a good idea.
Thumbs up. Okay, I do see some thumbs up.
Okay.
Hands raised. Okay. Noted. We will continue to do that. And Councilman Black and council members, when you do go through that process, and if there's anything that you need from our office in terms of, processes, operations, things like that, budget on our end, let us know in terms of the timeline. Pro and con statements. So, we've, embarrassingly, we've had to watch, Kyle Clark and everybody call our Blue Book Facebook on paper when we, what, like, we could agree with that. There's really nothing that would have allowed us to edit or do anything with some of those statements that came in, except to make sure that there was no F-bombs and that everything was within 500 words. So, part of the conversations that we've had a lot of different conversations around the Blue Book, but we wanted to revisit the notion and the recommendation from our office to allow acceptance of both pro and con statements earlier in the process for translation, printing, and mailing. Because right now we only allow the con statements that come in, and then the pro statement is drafted by the proponents. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that and your input.
I mean, Clerk Lopez, I will definitely say, I mean, thank you for this recommendation. I think that being able to do this earlier on in the process is absolutely vital. I know we've had discussion about there's a big difference between translation and proper interpretation, and a translation is something that can happen quicker than an interpretation. And when something as big as someone's vote and how they're coming into something that can be confusing, we need to make sure that we have the time to get this properly interpreted. So I definitely think that this is something that we need to move forward on to ensure proper, genuine voter access.
May I? Okay,
Flynn, yes, sorry.
thank you. Just to clarify, were you talking about accepting pro statements from people other than the initiators?
So you're on mute.
Sorry, God, you think after all these Zoom meetings, I'd be better at that. I think that's what the intent was for us. And with the feedback we got from this group and the conversations that we're having, Audrey, I see that your hand is up, kind of.
I'm here, sir.
Okay, the reason I asked that is because there was a case that, Mark, you may recall this, or David, because I don't know if it was at the city or state level, but there was a case of an initiative, or maybe it was a referred measure that a supposed pro statement came in from an entity that was opposed to the measure, and it was written as a pro statement that was really meant to steer people to be against it, because it said, we're for this because it's going to do all these things that the opposition was really saying it was going to cause. And so I would warn against that. I don't know how we would handle that if somebody submitted a con statement that was really crafted to be a pro statement. It could be easy to game the system. There should be a mechanism at least to handle that.
Well,
yeah.
In our recommendation, just to be clear, I mean, I think I asked that within a question, right? But the main question is so that we would be able to accept those statements earlier in the process, right? I think that's our main concern and our main recommendation, that we accept those earlier in the process so that we can kind of go through everything. But I think that's an excellent question to bring up. Is this group, would they consider accepting other pro statements coming in? So, I mean, I think, like I said, right now we just allow the proponents to do it because they are the main initiators of their ordinance. So, Ian and Councilman Amanda Sawyer.
I think Clerk Lopez, I mean, having written several of these, I would very much like to continue the process where the people who have put the hard work into going out and collecting the signatures are in control of how they're messaging it to the people. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to do it. And I would agree that I could easily see people trying to come around on the other side, like Kevin Flynn is saying, Councilman Flynn, excuse me.
Councilman Sawyer?
Yep. So I just wanted to make sure Ian was finished. I agree with Ian 100%, having written one of these myself. I think that the pro statements are really valuable in terms of, the people who are in the in the weeds on the proposal are really, have very clear messaging. And if the clerk's office does feel that accepting pro statements from others is a good idea, and actually this I think goes for the con statements as well. There's, I think we need to put some sort of mechanism in place for, I don't know if it's summarizing or if it is, I don't know if you guys receive these, but in our office, we'll get an auto statement that just, people put their emails in and then they just go to us, and we'll get, 500 of exactly the same email with just different names. And I would hate to see something like that be able to happen when it comes to these statements as well, because I think that they're really important and really clarifying for the community. So if the goal is to provide our residents with the clearest information possible, I don't know exactly how you do that and be sure to maintain everyone's First Amendment rights. But I do think that it's important to have some sort of discussion about like what guardrails exist there, because I think, for the pro statements in particular, the group that's in the weeds on it and knows the real details, knows the messaging that they want to share with the community. And other people's pro statements might end up, distracting from that a little bit. But that's also valuable input. So I don't know how you balance that and ensure, that we're making sure that we're keeping people's First Amendment rights at the forefront as well. This is a tough one for sure. Thanks.
I appreciate that, Councilwoman. And I think, our recommendation is just as for the mere question to allow acceptance of both of those statements earlier in the process, right? So that we can actually have time for the translation and everything else. I think the notion of whether we can accept other pro statements is an interesting one. And I think, that you do bring up an issue that would be very, very hard for us and very technical for us to have to try to navigate and decipher. I want to go to my co-chair, Councilwoman Black, and then I know that Audrey, Alton, Karen, and Mark's hands are also up.
I don't mean to jump in front of the line. I'll just be really quick, but I do think the proponent should write their own. But we had a little bit of this conversation last time about verifying that the statements are accurate. And I know that that is not something that you're able to do at this time, but is there ever a situation when a proponent would say something that wasn't true? What could you do about it?
Yeah, Alton sees these as Alton has seen these through various different cycles and has some really good input. So if I can just really quickly go over to Alton, I know that you have some expertise being that you see these come in on our behalf. So Alton and then Audrey.
Yep, I'll just tag in real quick. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, 2 points on this. One is to what Councilmember Blacks was sort of alluding to here. I just wanted to take it a little further into the fact that sometimes that also comes up as part of the summarization part, not the veracity part, but the part as far as sometimes someone will come in over the 500 words, and we're always trying to make sure to err on the side of really trying not to boil out a salient point in the interest of space. But we also found out that this last go around that hyphens constitute words. So we had a couple that, because some hyphenated words came in like at 507. And so we had to do some trimming up there. And then from a communications standpoint, the other thing I want to make sure people remember is that we send out this municipal blue book in tandem as part of the Tabor notice. And so we really have to be careful in how we message the seeking of public input on our website, because not everyone gets the nuances between the two. And so they will call us saying, well, why can we chime in on both sides of A, B, or C, but cannot chime in on D, E, and F. And that's because A, B, and C are actually ballot questions that affect debt or taxes and fall under Tabor. So there is some communications nuance when we're working through this process. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Alton, for that. Ms. Klein, and then let's go with Karen Goldman and then Mark Ruskin.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. And I think that Councilwoman Sawyer makes some really excellent points. A lot of these can be sticky wickets, and we are constrained by some of the things that we can't do the veracity piece. And so we've had a lot of talk about, maybe there is like a nonpartisan research entity that could possibly be created somewhere down the road. And I'm going to put that on my, 10 or 15 year plan here. But until then, this is a great conversation and I really appreciate it. And I think the councilwoman might have actually persuaded me on this one. And I think that maybe we reassess adding pro statements in here. So thank you for the excellent comments.
Thank you, Audrey. Ms. Goldman.
Thank you. I want to kind of pick up a little bit of what Alton had mentioned. There is a difference between comments provided by citizens or people eligible to vote on the item and the summary or the statement that is created as a result of those comments. And as Alton clearly identified, when you have a Tabor matter, the summaries on either pro or con are based upon comments that have been received by the citizens. Now, what I'm hearing some of the discussion support is the idea that there shouldn't be any comments from the citizens that will be on the pro side that will become part of the pro summary. And so I'm wondering, how you can kind of justify doing it one way for Tabor items, but doing it another way for non-Tabor items. It seems to me that something that might help the citizens understand things would be the ability for anybody to provide the comments. And then again, let the proponents of an initiated measure create a summary based on not just what they think their position should be, but based upon what other people have contributed to it. So that would be the only comment that I would make at this point.
Thank you, Ms. Goldman. Mr. Gruskin.
Sure. And let me just say at the outset, in light of the sentiment that's been expressed, you're not going to like what I have to say, and that's okay. I have two thoughts about your process for developing a pro and con statement. Number one, the pro statement shouldn't be a stand-in for the proponents to be able to sell their idea to the public. There's no basis. That's not how it works at the state level. I'm not aware of any municipal government that allows that. There is certainly a process in Tabor and at the state level where there's an evaluation by qualified staff that doesn't have an axe to grind. But I think it would be a horrific error to allow the proponents. You've just been through an election where you've had proponents of two measures who have portrayed certain things that have complicated the accuracy of voter understanding. And now what you're looking to do is to embody it either as a matter of ordinance or charter change. I think that's an extraordinary error, which brings me to my second point. Colorado Revised Statute 1-45-117 prohibits any government entity or agency from spending public funds in order to persuade people to vote for or against the measure. If in fact what you were doing was providing a balanced pro and con, you wouldn't really have to worry about that. But in many measures, there either isn't an organized no side, or it hasn't come together at the point at which comments are accumulated for purposes of the Blue Book. And therefore you don't have, this is true on a lot of Tabor measures, you don't have a no side, not necessarily. I'm not giving you legal advice, those of you who are city officials. I'm simply telling you there is a state statute out there that someone who is disgruntled with either the format of the discussion of a ballot measure or ballot measures, or the result of an election, albeit the result would probably be too late, and the court would decide that. You do not want to be sued under 145, 117, and you do not want to have to defend, in light of this conversation, why you only allowed proponents to say whatever they wanted and the city paid for it. So I would suggest to you that there are multiple advantages to having an open process whereby city staff evaluates comments. They can evaluate accuracy, they can evaluate political sensitivity. One of the problems with Tabor is that you have to summarize all the comments that come in. You don't have to craft your ordinance or charter amendment that requires that, only to summarize the principal arguments that are of the greatest salience to Denver voters, for instance. And I just made that up, so I don't know if that's the wording that you would use. But in any event, I would suggest to you, no matter how committed initiative proponents might be and how familiar they might be with the very best arguments, the limitation on public comment and the use of a political statement by one side but not the other is not going to end up leaving you in a very good place. Thanks.
Really, really, really appreciate those comments, Mr. Ruskin. Thank you. Mr. Broadwell.
Good afternoon, everybody. First, let me say I like what Mark just said, but I'm going to say something that I think echoes what Alton Dillard was saying a little while ago, which is confusing this whole conversation is that there are different ground rules for Tabor questions and non-Tabor questions. Yeah. And one of the things that, as I've always understood it, the Constitution itself, Tabor itself, dictates that if there's an initiative on a Tabor matter, the proponents get to write the summary, and we can't change that. It's non-negotiable. And unfortunately, it turns out being a lot of what Mark was just describing, but that's provided for in the Constitution. That, for example, in recent years, when there have been initiated sales tax increases, that's a Tabor question, and the proponent of those sales tax questions got to write the summary, and there's no room for home rule municipalities to vary that. Now, I think when the choice was made to create a Denver Ballot Information Booklet a few years ago, they modeled that language and applied it to non-Tabor questions as well, I believe. But part of this, I guess, in what I'm saying and what I believe, Alton, you can chime in again if you like, but what Alton was saying earlier is that there are different ground rules. And when it's Tabor ballot questions, some of that's dictated by the Constitution, including that key point that I just made.
I really appreciate that analysis, Mr. Broadwell. I think this is something that we can continue to look at and refine. And Councilwoman Black, I think this is something that we can also continue to really look at in terms of what other, what's done at the state and what possibly the capacity could be for that kind of staff time and analyses and things like that. And I know that's something that we talked about early on in this process, but this is exactly one of those things where it would require that Office of Legislative Services and folks that are looking at it year round, right? So, Mr. Broadwell, your hand is still up. I don't know if there's any other questions from you or anybody else on this particular topic. So we can continue to review the acceptance of the multiple pro or con. We kind of got our input from the group with that part. I just want to make sure that we have the opportunity and the go-ahead to be able to submit to ask to be able to submit those deadlines for those statements to come in earlier so we can translate and do everything else and make sure that we hit the right shot clock. Translation for a lot of these things is pretty darn difficult, especially when some of the topics are very, very legal in nature. And so some of these words, tend to have different meanings if we don't have the right translation. And then also looking in towards the future, right? With the next census or the next American Community Survey update, we thought we would have that threshold that would be met by Section 203. That would basically have forced us to be able to, or not forced us, but would have required us to put it in a third language on the ballot, and that would have been Vietnamese. Unfortunately, it didn't happen this go round, but I think with any kind of update with the census, things can change, and then us becoming a Section 203 county with that third language, I think having that earlier that time earlier to be able to get that translation in would be super beneficial. So input received. The next thing that we wanted to talk about and our main event in terms of our main discussion today was petition thresholds. Sorry. We want, while my office doesn't have an opinion on any prospective changes, we do want to make some space for anyone that might have some ideas or thoughts on this, and we want to be able to explain the effect of any changes on our operations and our budget. So there's petition thresholds. While we haven't seen any recommendations yet, we want to open the discussion up. And one of the conversation is, could be petition thresholds in terms of the number of signatures required. Do we need to up the number of signatures since Denver has grown? Do we need to do the same thing for candidate petitions, right? Is 100 signatures required for each council member and 300 for each citywide enough, or is it too small? And then the other idea of gathering idea of requiring petitions to be gathered from all council districts if you are citywide, or if you have that, I'm sorry, not if you are citywide, but if you have that initiated ordinance. So Councilwoman Black, I will turn it over to you for that part of the discussion as well.
I would like to ask, I think maybe Audrey, could you email this PowerPoint to everyone, please?
Of course, ma'am. Yes, absolutely.
Because I don't know what you prepared. Do you have like slides with petitions? I just wanted to discuss an idea that would require that signatures come from every council district. I'll give a hypothetical that I just made up. This is not real, but you could imagine that, say, some wealthier neighborhoods like Cherry Creek and Congress Park and the Country Club were upset about ADUs. And they wanted to put something on the ballot to ban ADUs in Denver because they didn't want them in their neighborhoods. They could just stand in front of the Whole Foods in Cherry Creek and get all their signatures and get something on the ballot. I think that's an equity issue. I think that when we think about getting things on the ballot, that the petition, the initiator should have to go to all council districts and get either some percentage of their signatures from every council district or a flat number from every council district, just to show a minimal level of support from across the city. I think sometimes we've seen some ballot measures where, possibly they weren't collecting signatures in certain neighborhoods. So I do think that is an equity issue. I just wanted to bring it up for conversation. There is, a state law, which is very different from this law, but it does require that there are signatures gathered in every Senate district to have an amendment to the state constitution. So I just thought that would be an interesting thing for this group to discuss and provide feedback for.
Councilman Sawyer.
Thanks so much. I agree with Councilwoman Black. I think this is an equity issue. And asking, I think maybe coming up, we're going to talk about signature thresholds in terms of the numbers, but I do think that if there is some way to ensure that all 11 council districts are appropriately represented in any sort of citizen initiative, that makes a lot of sense, just to ensure that there is conversation happening around the city to ensure that we are being equitable, that we are engaging all constituents in something like this. And I think this is, I leave it up to the clerk's office to maybe make some recommendations on how exactly that would work or what those thresholds might be. But I do think that this is a valuable proposal that we should consider. Thanks.
No, I do think that this, oh, go ahead, Clerk O'Malley.
I understand the intent, but I also want to put out for consumption in terms of equity is maybe inequitable for petition gatherers that don't have resources to go to other council districts across the city. So I just want us to be mindful of that. Some folks don't have resources to traverse to other council districts. Campaigns don't have resources to deploy people to traverse to other council districts. And so I just want to put that out for consideration also.
Thank you. I'm still going to call you clerk no matter what, because I think, that sticks with you. Martha Turney and then Ian Tafoya.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo a little bit on what Clerk O'Malley said, and that's that we've also seen at the state level some attempts to put all your resources on a decline to sign campaign in one district, and you only have to convince one district to not get, people in one district to not sign, and then you can scuttle the whole measure. So I think we have to think about it from both angles. It's an equity issue, I agree, but it can be manipulated in a way that I think becomes an equity issue on the other side. So if in the example about the Cherry Creek Whole Foods, you could get the people in the Cherry Creek district to not sign, and then even though you got more than enough signatures elsewhere, the measures can't get on. So something to be very mindful of. And you certainly wouldn't want to require all signatures to be divvied up amongst the districts. So the way they do it at the state level is, is a small percentage of the signatures that you need have to be gathered in each district. You certainly wouldn't want to have it be that you had to have 1/11 of all signatures gathered from within each district. So things to think about.
Good things to think about. Thank you. Mr. Tafoya, the man with the clipboards.
Well, I appreciate that. I echo what I heard from the previous clerk, the two previous speakers. I see Jenna has also commented there. I do think that opens up a strategy where money could pour in against you in one district and harm you. I also think it would be hard for us to track. We're already collecting twice as many signatures. There's not a box in there that says what your district is. We're counting them, we're bringing them in, we're trying our best. It just seems like it would be a really challenging feat for volunteer opportunities without resources, as Clerk O'Malley was saying.
Thank you, Mr. Tafoya. Mr. Bratton.
Hey, thanks, Mr. Clerk and group. I just want to just a quick point of clarification. The state law requires that I think it's 2% from the Senate districts for constitutional changes. So if we were to do something similar, just for discussion purposes, just so you guys are aware that that would be similar to us.
Charter.
Not for the charter, but not necessarily the code. So just that distinction, it's 2% from the Senate districts, and also requires a vote of 55% from the people to become law for the Constitution, but there are no such requirements at the state level to amend the statute. So just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Councilwoman Black and Councilman Flynn.
Yeah, it's in response to what Troy just said. I don't believe that we could apply something like this to charter amendments because it's in state law that we have to get 5% of signatures. I don't think that we could change that, but you would know better than I was. I was just, throwing this out to hear all your comments, and they're all really great comments. I wasn't suggesting that you would be required to get 55% of the vote. I just was using that as an example, nor was I suggesting that it would be divided 11 ways. It was just, the idea was to show some sort of very minimal level of citywide support.
Gotcha. Councilman Flynn, I think I'll call on you, and then I have a question for my elections director, my all-star elections director over here.
I just want to caution that we not overthink the issue of requiring signatures from each of the 11, a certain minimum threshold. It's very doubtful. I would have a lot of doubts that you could pour a lot of money into Cherry Creek and still prevent a minimum floor of people from the council district that covers that, which is currently 10 and soon will be 5, to quash a petition at that level. If it was a small, like a 3 or 4% of signatures must come from each of the 11. But it would show that there has been some effort to outreach and to some of the parts of town that really don't have a lot of voice at the moment. And I'm thinking Clerk Lopez of our side of town. As you've often said, and I've quoted you many times, sometimes the city looks on the South Platte River as though it were the Rio Grande. And I couldn't agree more. I would love to see more people engaged from council districts 2, 3. 1 has changed quite a bit, but even council district 1. But I just don't want us to overthink it. That, as Councilwoman Black said, it's not like we're requiring that 11% of, or whatever, 100 divided by 11, doing math in my head quickly, that you have to have an even number from each of the districts. But just a certain floor would show a minimum threshold level of effort to educate people in other parts of town. And I understand the obstacles that Ian has pointed out, that when you're outside of King Soopers in Bear Valley, you don't know, they might have come in from Council District 7 to do their shopping. We don't know that, but a little bit more due diligence wouldn't be, shouldn't be off the table. Thanks.
Thank you. Before I go to Jenna and Mr. Broadwell and David Broadwell, I'm sorry, Ms. Ozels, Director Dina Dawson, in terms of probably like operational impact, budgetary, personnel, stuff like that, I'd like to kind of hear some of your thoughts, being that, we do have, we had 9 petitions come in last week, and not last week, but last year. There was a lot of work that our voter services crew had to do in a very short amount of time with some pretty finite shot clocks. What would this do? What would we need to, how would this impact us in terms of our voter services crew and verification and all that stuff?
Sure. Thank you, Clerk. Hi, everyone. For this type of change, it seems like, I'm not sure if the statewide voter registration system is currently set up to be able to collect and identify signatures per district. So it could be something as simple as working with the Secretary of State's office to have an enhancement made to the system. It may currently already exist. I'm not familiar with it because that's not how we currently operate. If there wasn't something set up in the system, it would be a nightmare. So it would be something where we would absolutely have to get the statewide registration system set up so that we're looking for that targeted amount of signatures from each district. But I'm happy to look into it, find out how it's actually working, and then report back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director. Ms. Ozels.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. So I just kind of wanted to offer some perspective from kind of the campaign side of trying to get things on the ballot and what that looks like. And I will, I'm taken back to a presentation that we had from another city clerk's office. Maybe it was with the previous iteration of this committee, but where they essentially were talking about a city of a similar size and how they had grown their ballot signature requirements year after year with the population growth of the city, and where Denver has not done that. We have not updated our signature requirements to match that massive population growth that we have had in the city. And I definitely see that we need to make this a higher threshold in order to actually get on the ballot. I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of people who, first of all, we have an incredibly long ballot. The longer the ballot is, oftentimes the more people who end up dropping off, the more people who are more inconsistent voters. That is my number one concern, is making sure that people feel empowered to approach their ballot, that it is not overly long, that it is not held up with a bunch of things that essentially a lot of people, or not a lot of people, but there are certain people who are kind of creating careers off of running ballot measures in the city of Denver to kind of see what might stick, so that they can see if they can run it in other places. I am very tired of Denver being used as a playground for national groups or other folks to come in and try to see what spaghetti might stick to the wall. But I also very strongly believe that the state requirements around 2% based on each Senate district are completely wrong. To Councilman Flynn's point earlier, that makes it incredibly difficult for signature gatherers to actually know who the heck they're talking to. It does not sound like that is a feasible pathway forward for many different reasons. So I would be very interested to know and to hear a little bit more about what that increasing the signature requirement based on population might look like, and what those operational and budgetary impacts might be on the clerk's office. I know Ms. Klein mentioned that is a little bit of a difficult number to calculate, and I respect that, but I wonder if maybe something we can talk about today is, since the per district does not seem feasible, can we maybe talk about today a couple of numbers or a couple of different approaches to how we might increase that signature requirement level based on population, while still keeping it accessible to people to get things on the ballot and not making it something that they can't, but also to where we might be able to be a bit more representative of the population that we have now. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Ozels. Mr. Broadwell, and then Councilwoman Sawyer.
Thank you. Like Gina, I was hoping we would be talking about the citywide signature requirement. And it's one of the topics I highlighted at the very first meeting when we first got together. But I want to start with a question for Councilman Flynn. Get ready, John, or Kevin. We were talking about signature requirements, 20 years ago. I was engaged with council discussions of this a long time ago. Nothing ever happened, but more recently, I know, Kevin, I believe you were involved with a discussion in the prior clerk's administration about reforms to some of these requirements. And that's when we got the good reform of stabilizing it at 2%. Right. But did you also talk about increasing the overall number? And why did the group not do it at that point? Or can you reflect on that? Was that part of the conversation then?
It was, and I think I could see Paul grinning. So he's probably the better one to answer that, because he was advocating that, correct me, Clerk Lopez, if I say this incorrectly, but he was advocating that the process result in a higher number. And what we ended up doing was basically stabilizing it around where it was by making it, I think, is it at 2% of active registered?
Yes.
Okay. And I think Clerk Lopez was advocating 2.5 or 3%, 5%.
2.5.
2.5.
Yeah, and right. it's just I'm by no means am I a mathematician. I'm terrible. I do not do math on TV. But the threshold was 5% for any charter changes,
right?
But 2% for code changes. And I thought, well, shouldn't it just be half? And that little 0.5% would have made it easier just for common knowledge. It's only half, right? And it'd be easier for petitioners, the public, for all of us and the policy making world at the time, just to really know that that's the marker. But it also would have gave a little uptick, given the fact that Denver has Denver had grown at the time, I think, in 1 year alone, like 40,000 residents, right? And we've now eclipsed last year in 2020 or in 2021, I'm sorry, 500,000 voters. So for the first time ever. So, you know, it's not necessarily based off population of Denver, but the voting population has significantly increased since it was first set. And it really didn't give it a much of a bump. It lost by 1 vote, but I gave it a shot.
Does that answer your question, David?
I think so. I remember what you're saying. To be clear, this was when Paul was on council,
Yes.
attempting to propose that on council. And I remember it well as well. But let me just put something on the table in terms of my point of view, which is I was always amazed when I worked for the city that we didn't see a lot more petitions because the signature requirement is so low. And they have picked up a lot in recent years. And a lot of the ban discussion over the past few months has been talking about lessons learned from last year, from where we had an extraordinary number of initiated measures on one ballot. And one thing that I noticed is I went back and looked at the numbers. I think there were 6 petition matters that made the ballot. They all pretty easily satisfy the low 2% requirement. But then 5 of the 6 failed by an average of over 60%. And these are proposals from different places on the political spectrum. You know, some were conservative, some were on the other end. But there was an extraordinary number, but also a lot of them went down in flames big time. And this is the whole reason you have a threshold signature requirement, is to determine some critical mass of public interest and public support. And I have to wonder whether Denver's ultra low requirement will result in a trend toward more of this, where just with minimal public support, you get on the ballot. You know, one point of view would be, well, the system worked. You know, people should be able to get on pretty easily. And if voters don't like it, they can vote it down. But when all of these proposals from all these different directions show up with not a whole lot of signature requirement to ante up and to get on the ballot to begin with, then everybody has to mobilize to oppose. Money gets spent in campaigns. A lot of people are freaking out about what's going to happen if this or that passes and so forth. There should be a more credible qualification requirement, I think, in Denver before things make the ballot. That's why it's there as a legal principle. And just about everybody that I know of, both in Colorado and out of Colorado, has a higher standard than Denver does. So I think Denver's just going to continue to see more of this in terms of proposals from the fringes making the ballot because the signature requirement is so low, but even if they don't pass.
So, Councilman Sawyer, and thank you, Mr. Broadwell. And then we'll go with Ian after.
Thanks. So I think that Mr. Broadwell's points are well taken, and I tend to agree with you, but I also think we need to be very careful about how we were to raise the bar on something like this, because we don't want yes, we want to make sure that there is wide support for ballot measures that go on the ballot, but we don't want to make it harder for things to go on the ballot, right? We need to be very, very careful about how we would do something like this if we were going to do something like this. And so I think that's why Councilwoman Black's suggestion of requiring, a low percentage, but a percentage from every council district sort of does what we're talking about doing here, but in a way that's not raising that bar to the point where we're making it, quote unquote, harder for things to get on the ballot. One of the things that is really special about the city of Denver and the state of Colorado is that there is this ability to run these initiatives that, yes, might be on the fringes, but that's also the people's right. So I think we want to be very careful about what that looks like and how we would do that. And I think, the potential for ensuring that it is a broadly supported initiative that comes from across the country might achieve that same goal while still being respectful of the people's right to put things on the ballot. So I think I just want to put out there that we need to be very careful about how we approach this. That's it.
No, and Councilwoman Sawyer, that you took the I was just about to say a very same thing as a reminder when we first created this committee. The intent and the purpose is to really look at, kind of tying things up, modernizing, tweaking here and there, bringing things up to speed, matching up timelines and looking at some of these ideas. And the caveat was without creating a chilling effect on the democratic process. And that's something that, throughout this whole conversation is a guardrail. Is the object of this group, the object of these efforts are not to make it harder, and shouldn't be to make it harder for folks to be able to access the ballot, but to do it in a way that is fair, right? And without creating that chilling effect on the democratic process. So I couldn't agree more with what you just said, and I think we got to be very, very mindful about that. And if I may add, just knowing these parts around here. Every council district is charged, and every council person is charged with representing almost 65,000 people. And it's not just voters, right? But people. And no matter where you go throughout the city, that number is going to change. When I represented Council District 3 in the West Side, we represented about 65,000 people. But the voting population in universe was only about 15,000. So that changes in every single part of the town, depending on, and especially now with things changing so much at a faster pace and with other forces that we cannot control, we have to be very mindful and very cognizant of that. So this is my 2 cents, just to kind of piggyback off of your comments, Councilwoman. And I think we just have to remind ourselves of that, the democratic process, right? So, Mr. Tafoya, you have your hand up, and then Ms. Goldman.
Yeah, back to being the person who's carried it with the clipboards. As I understand it, the Denver Green Roof Initiative, all volunteer, made it one of the first, I think, in the city to do it. Then the threshold went up. And in all the ballot initiatives we've run since then, we've needed money. And so when you talk about the fear of outside money coming in and using Denver as a petri dish, when local grassroots efforts now need money, they also go to outside groups to look for money, and then they influence you. They tell you how you should spend your money. They direct you on decisions that you should make. And to me, that is undemocratic to the Denverites who brought forward their own initiatives. And I've seen it play out in the back rooms when we've been trying to fundraise to get at those extra signatures. Now, if we are to improve the process for verification, if we're able to get laptops or iPads that are actually workable and provide those services, then I think those thresholds come down, right? If we're able to collect 17,000 signatures and the new number is 13, but I could count on them a lot better than I could of the ones that are in the books, and it doesn't cost me as much to hook them up to the internet and to do all those things, then I might be a little bit more open to it. What I can say is the higher the number goes, the more influence dollars have in the democratic process. And I think we've been working to reduce that across the country and certainly here in Denver.
Thank you, Mr. Tafoya. Ms. Goldman.
So, thank you. So far I've heard talk about identifying the number of signatures based on the population of Denver. I'm suggesting that if you look at what most of the other municipalities in the states do, which is base their threshold on the number of registered electors within the community, you might find that by even if you increase the number of registered, if you increase the percentage by using registered electors, the total number that is required may not be that much higher from what you have right at the moment. I mean, when you talk about population, you're talking about people who can't vote, you're talking about babies. The other thing that's nice about using registered electors is you are going to have accurate numbers. Whereas with using population figures, the farther away you get from the census, the more you have to extrapolate in order to figure out what the numbers are to be used. And it's not going to be as accurate as using the number of registered voters. So I'm just letting you know that most of the other municipalities in the state of Colorado base it on registered electors and not population.
Thank you, Ms. Goldman, and I really, really appreciate those comments. In Denver, that's why we use active registered voters, and we go based off of that active number, and that's updated on the daily, actually. So, SCORE is a statewide system, and it's a system that it is part of our list. It's excellent list maintenance, and it's a cornerstone of our security and transparency in Colorado. And it's in its third version already. So I think, being able to use that, I think one of the things that I know that in terms of feedback is making sure that number's posted or updated on a website every so often, just so that folks know. But I do really, really appreciate your comments. Audrey Klein.
Thank you, sir. Ian made me think of something just now, and we can talk more about it later as we go through some more of the recommendations. And you've heard us talk really early on in this process about updating a process for training and requirements for signature gatherers. And I think part of what we're doing, our office is obviously sort of agnostic on how many signatures we might, if we move that threshold or not. But one of the things that I think would make it easier to access the ballot is to really have a more robust training and those requirements around how to gather signatures and how to do that well. Then you're not looking at getting double the amount of signatures that are required, but we can actually help increase the accuracy of those signatures. It would lessen the burdens inside of our office, but it would also just make the process more efficient for the folks that are trying to access the ballot, so that it's not a question of how many valid signatures do you have in the box that you're delivering. We want to be able to give people a better process, and so that they have a better idea of where they stand at any given moment. So it's another one of those areas where if we can weave together these policies in a way that makes sense, I think everybody can get what they want out of it.
Thank you, Audrey Klein. Councilwoman Black, I don't know if there's anything that, as a co-chair committee, is there anything else that you wanted to add on this particular topic? It looks like, Councilwoman, it looks like Mr. Broadwell's hand is up.
Thank you. I want to first comment on what Councilwoman Sawyer said a minute ago. That's exactly what I've heard council people say all through the years when we're having this discussion. They don't want to be perceived as making it harder. And that's one of the reasons I called on Councilman Flynn earlier to give me a sense for if it was discussed before seriously about raising it, and kind of what the flavor of that recent conversation was. But since that conversation, since we stabilized it at 2%, one thing that happened at the state level that we talked about a minute ago was Amendment 71 passed for state constitutional amendments, raised the bar. And the question was put to the voters, and it said it right there in the question: in order to make it more difficult to amend the state constitution, shall the ground rules be changed as follows? And lo and behold, I admit, it shocked me. The voters agreed that it should be more difficult. It should be harder in terms of the arguments they heard pro and con for that. Now, I think a lot of folks just take it for granted that the nature of the petition right, the initiative and referendum right, is such that folks want it to be easy. But I think there's a sense that may not always be the case in terms of what people have experienced seeing show up in terms of initiated measures on the ballot through the years. We've had some doozies through the years, extraterrestrial affairs commissions and seizing people's cars and that sort of thing that I've seen. And people saw this whopper of a ballot last time, and they may want a system that kind of separates the wheat from the chaff, before they're reading this War and Peace in terms of the length of their ballot. So, but you don't know unless you ask them. And I just think it's remarkable that on a statewide basis, a question that flat out was going to make the process harder passed. Now, I agree with what Troy Bratton said earlier, which was that was about state constitutional amendments. We're talking about municipal initiatives here. So it's apples and oranges to some extent, but it was just a remarkable thing that maybe makes me, I think, recheck the political feasibility of getting the voters to potentially approve a raising of the 2% to something higher.
Thank you, Mr. Broadwell. And I think, part of our analysis back when, and we did do a lot of homework on the council in I think it was 2019, 2018, when this was being discussed, is comparing it to other cities and other like cities, and cities like Portland and Seattle, and areas that, had, 7% threshold, right? And an 11% threshold, and cities that were perceived to be more progressive, so to speak, than Denver. And so, part of that conversation was, and I think the appetite of the clerk at that time was we just want to kind of just transition it, because of and it was not necessarily to find the right number or to find the right threshold of number, but to kind of keep this boat steady in terms of, before it was a percentage of the mayoral turnout for the race prior, right? And that fluctuated based off of, was this an exciting mayoral race or not, right? And I think, it was too much of a fluctuation, and the philosophy behind it was just to stabilize it, right? So the conversation that we had at the time was purely just out of just being neat, right? I mean, 2.5% is just half of 5. It would be easier to remember and just easier for us all together. And it was probably maybe a little bit of OCD, that it would just be nice and neat at 2% as opposed to 2. So, but, and then also, the population was a little different. We surely hadn't eclipsed 500,000 voters at the time. So, Mr. Tafoya.
Well, I just want to respond to what David had to say about, I think, where the electorate's at. I think one of the things that's really positive about the initiative process is that there's a backstop there, that council can make changes in six months after an initiative is passed to clean up things that you learn along the campaign, that your opponents point out, that people point out. I'm not an election attorney. I'm not even an attorney. So I'm not sure if that's true for an amendment, right, when they get hung in there, but that's how my understanding is they stick. And I think that that's people want to maybe see that be more challenging, but the backstop of an initiative and the ability for council to bring task forces together to work through issues that arise, I think is something different. And I think that the people of Denver, in my experience, are okay with the process because of that.
Thank you, Mr. Tafoya. Councilman Flynn, and I think we kind of got some really good input from this. We can.
Yeah, just as a cautionary on that, Ian, for instance, the green roofs process, as it was written and as it was passed, it was disastrous, had a disastrous effect on the city. A lot of commercial building owners who were planning roof replacements suddenly were stalled out because of the enormous expense that it placed on them. And it did take a while to do it, and we had 10 votes. But David, or actually Anshul, I see Anshul has replaced John here. I believe after 6 months, it takes 10 votes of council to amend a citizen initiative, supermajority. Is that correct? So it's not just 7 votes. The Fair Elections Fund, for example, the way it was initially certified for the ballot before it was withdrawn in place of and replaced with the one that we rewrote with Owen Perkins and Dave Sabatos, could not have worked the way the city functions. It would have been a disaster in the 2019 elections. And thank you to Owen and David for sitting down with us and writing something that would actually could be administered. So I don't know that that's a great comfort, that if something really problematic having a difficult impact on the city through a citizen initiative were to pass, that to say, well, after 6 months, it takes 10 members of council to change it in any way isn't very comforting, depending on the circumstances of what that initiative is. Anshul, David, am I correct that it's 10 votes? Oh, Troy, I didn't see Troy here.
So Councilman Flynn, you're right. So within 6 months, city council, after 6 months, within 10 years, it's 2/3 votes.
A 2/3. Is that 9 or 10? I'm always confused by it. 9 is 2/3, but on rezonings that are protested, it takes 10, which is more than 2/3.
So that's a good question. I think it would be 9, but yeah.
Thank you, Sky. Sky said 9 in the chat.
Yeah, it's 9, and the 10 votes for legal protest is specifically called out as 10 votes in the code. So it's different than the 2/3.
Thanks.
Always think about it as it's the same number as a veto. Ms. Ozels.
Thanks so much, Mr. Clerk. I guess so. I kind of want to just recenter on kind of what we're trying to accomplish as part of this conversation, because it seems to me like we're having a lot of, back and forth around, do we want to, essentially the question, do we want to keep the petition threshold where it is right now, or do we want to shift it? And if we want to shift it, then now we're kind of down into this other rabbit hole of conversation, which I completely understand. And I'm about to go jump back down into that rabbit hole myself. But I also wanted to just kind of recheck in on with where we're at on kind of what we're attempting to accomplish, or what kind of recommendations that we're trying to get from this, because I admit I'm a little bit confused on that by this point of the conversation. But I will also say that as someone who's run a lot of ballot measures, as someone who's run a lot of bills, I am very interested in the stakeholder process of the creation of policy. And part of the issue of the signature requirements being so much lower than cities of similar populations is that it allows for things that have not been through a stakeholder process to get put onto the ballot all that much quicker. And we are then essentially, if we're so concerned about money in politics, if we are so concerned about government spending, changes to the city budget, et cetera, I mean, to avoid the negative perception of a potentially 0.5% change in percent of what we're asking for, we're essentially saying that the city of Denver has to take on the time, energy, and resources of doing a stakeholder process that could and should be done as part of the ballot initiative process. And so obviously that's the difference between, you can't regulate if someone is going to actually do their stakeholder process or not. That's a matter of someone being good at politics and good at legislating, or not being good at politics and good at legislating. And you can't really make people do that based upon a law. But I think if part of what we're doing is trying to avoid a negative perception, that's not necessarily a good reason to not want to look into making changes if we do feel that they are necessary. But that is partially where I bring us back to, like, do we feel that these changes are necessary or no? And I do think that we need to increase the threshold a little bit. I do not think that we need to go to Seattle numbers of 7 or 11 or whatever the heck that is. But I do think a reasonable increase of 2.5 or even up to 3% would make a certain amount of sense. Or if it elongated a process to make it so that a stakeholder process is not pushed off essentially onto the council and onto the taxpayers in the city as well.
Well, we don't have, my office, we don't have an official opinion on the required number of petitions, or, I mean, there's, like I said, we see on the slide is basically our position. There will be some operational and budgetary impacts for us if they change, but really that's up to this group to mull over, and that was the purpose of it. But Councilman Black, you brought the idea of requiring petitions that be gathered from different council districts as an idea in terms of thresholds. I didn't know if you wanted to address that or.
No, I think that we had a lot of great comments, and some people here like the idea of collecting signatures in every district and some people don't. And I think both sides brought up some really good points. I still hope to bring this idea to the council, but I don't think this group probably has consensus on that. I do think we at some point should look at increasing the total percentage of signatures required to be more consistent with other states for the reasons that people here mentioned, but I don't think we're going to get through that today in the next 37 minutes.
Yeah. Well, with that, Councilman, I would like to come on to the next agenda item. And team, in terms of the BAM, if you want to move to the next slide. And forgive me, my voice is completely shot. feel like a Christopher Walken or something over here. So as part of the process, the council process has begun. I think, Councilwoman Black has had a couple of meetings in the Budget and Finance Committee, and it is scheduled, some of these changes. We have 2 bills that we have drafted that are should be in your inbox that we have provided based off of the input that we have gathered. If you want to move to the next slide. Now we separated it, and we also have 2 other documents that we provided to council members, but we also provided to the spam committee. And forgive me if it looks backwards, it's just because the timing just didn't add up. What we wanted to do, in an ideal world, we would have had this before the budget, the budget and policy committee meeting, but it was just a discussion. So this is our opportunity for us to be able to kind of walk you through the summary of what we have put together from my office in terms of the recommendations on how to proceed forward. Now we separated it out in 2 different bills, one to change the charter, the things that would be items that would be charter changes, and then items that would be ordinance or code changes. So we'll kind of fly through these, and if you have any questions on anything or any comments, please put your hand up. And Audrey, I don't know if maybe you wanted to chime in or you wanted to move through it.
Yeah, thank you. And I just sort of had a question for Councilwoman Black, if she wanted to continue on the process that was started in the last meeting of sort of trying to assess whether there was consensus on some of these things, because we acknowledge that there will be some areas where there's going to be some daylight or some things that aren't going to have a full consensus. I was just wanting to sort of see if that was something that, as we went through some of these, if we wanted to sort of assess that or not.
I think we should. However, there's only 34 minutes left of this meeting, so some of them might require more conversation. But yeah, I think that's.
I agree. Yeah, so Clerk, I guess it's sort of up to you how you want to go through them, because a lot of these have already had quite a bit of discussion. Yeah. I can let you sort of take it from here, but we do have it broken up by section of those bills and charter amendments. So just let me know how fast you want to go.
Let's go through them, and if there's some hands that pop up, we'll address those as they pop up. Okay, so the first item in terms of the charter amendment to change the candidate nomination timeline. So currently, that lost as a candidate may accept the nomination up to 55 days before the election. The law also requires that ballot content is certified at 60 days before an election. So this timeline needs to be broader and consistent with state law. And the recommendation for us was to change that 55-day timeline to 75 days to allow for exigent circumstances such as lawsuits or other issues. I don't know if there are any questions or anything to add, Audrey, on that one. And Dina, chime in as well too, because I know some of these are operational. Alton.
I don't think I have anything to add, sir. It's just this is the big one for me.
Okay. Yeah, that's a big one for us on our operations side. Second one, please. Next slide. So this would be the charter amendment to create a single subject requirement. We talked about this in the past. The current requirements for citizen referred initiatives do not require single subjects, but council referred items do, as well as state initiatives. And so this would do is kind of bring us into that same standard. And the recommendation from our office is also to conform charter to state law and city council requirement that allow single subject only for initiatives as well. Councilwoman Black, your hand is up.
Yeah, the previous slide about changing the candidate nomination timeline, we didn't ask if people supported that idea or not. I don't know if we were going to discuss that further. And then we did already all agree to the single subject.
I know we had some members missing as well.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so why don't we do that then? On the first one, timeline, hands.
Yes.
Okay. Or you're just saying yes to, I guess that works. Or we could do it the opposite way. Are there any other thoughts on it?
No.
Okay, we'll just move forward then.
It might be more constructive to just record dissent
Yeah, record dissent. Okay,
or questions. Okay.
all right. Next one. My voice is fading a little bit, so please stop me if you can't understand or anything. So the third would be a charter amendment on updating the title setting. We've had a lot of discussion on this one. Currently, my office can only accept or reject what is presented to the proponents. Titles can become a little convoluted, and the process can be tedious for both proponents of the clerk's proponents and our office. Charter is very clear that all elections matters shall be vested exclusively and in and exercised by the clerk and recorder. Our recommendation is a little different from what's already written there, and also because we would want that to have the draft title created by city council staff and city attorney at the review and comment phase. That's something that is a little different and new, but it allows for public comment as well and gives a final title setting to my office working in conjunction with the city attorney, and allows for an appropriate appeals process as well too. Conversation, thoughts?
I hate to do this, Paul, but on the previous slide, I know we all agreed on single subject, but as a retired recovering journalist, I just wanted to edit it because it's the way it's phrased. I don't think it's your recommendation doesn't say what I think we want it to say. It should say that we should amend the charter to require a single subject and instead of saying to allow a single subject.
On the previous.
Yeah. It
Okay.
says allow it only for initiatives, and I don't think that's what we need to do.
Okay.
We want to require it for initiatives because it's already required for us.
And I assume, Troy, that's
just a wordsmith. Didn't mean to do that, but
no, that's fine.
Okay, but now on this one, now you and I had a nice meeting on this, and I'm open to all suggestions on this. When this came to budget and policy, we talked about the charter right now says all matters, plenary powers relating to elections belong in the clerk's office. But as we talked about, I am attracted to the idea of a title board. This looks like it sort of mimics it, but there is no, the final authority rests solely with the clerk and not with city attorney, legislative analysts at council, and the clerk, like that triangle. So I'm willing to listen to the discussion on this. I'm determined that we need to move away from how it is now, where you can only accept or reject what's submitted. So I'll listen to the rest of the conversation.
Thoughts, Convo?
Clerk Lopez?
Yes, Mr. Gruskin.
So let me just make sure that I understand. The existing process allows for a change of an initiative between the review comment process and submission to the clerk. Is that correct?
For it to be, so it's
by the proponent.
Review and comment at city council, then it comes to us for the title setting. And then we can either accept or reject.
No. Let me be more.
Yeah, I got you.
And Ben may know exactly where I'm going. But the question is, will there be a title that's being set on an initiative that has changed materially by the time it gets submitted to the clerk's office? And Ben, you know where I am.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Mr. Gruskin. The idea here is you're talking about title, right? Not the text of the measure.
Right, but I'm just curious whether or not the title after review and comment, whether the text, the proponents can change the text after review and comment in light of comments that have been made by
Yeah, so text of the measure, the proponents can amend between review and comment, and when it gets, it's essentially the same. So if they added something substantive, then that would be something that they wouldn't be able to do, but they can make those adjustments. And then what would also come over, just like with the state process, would under our proposal would be a initial draft title from the folks from city council staff and the city attorneys, the legislative council that represent them.
To the extent that that's really helpful, Ben. Thank you. And I kind of figured you'd know both the answer and what I was thinking. The extent that the proponents change their measure between the review and comment process and submitting to the clerk to go on to the next level, to have a title that is set on the non-final version of the initiative is going to trigger comment that you can't use in certain instances, and that it isn't productive. So I suggest that you have a title, that draft title that is created after the point that the measure is submitted to the clerk's office, so that there can be public input and reaction to the draft title for purposes of improving it or calling to the official or title board's attention certain issues that they had not incorporated in the measure. So I just think the timing is off in the recommendation.
If I could just ask a quick question, Mr. Grusin, just to make sure that I understand what you're saying. So kind of the way that we saw it from our perspective and the way that our proposal looks now would be that the comment period would be between the time that the legislative council folks and city council staff submitted their draft title to us. And so that 5-day period would be between that time and when we start looking at the title. And is what you're suggesting that instead of having it during that period, that you'd essentially have the draft come to the clerk and recorder's office, and then that comment period would be after an initial draft created by the clerk and recorder's office, that would then allow folks to do that? Or
No. I'm trying to make it simpler, not more complex. Okay. Proponents go through review and comment. They figure out what changes they want to make to their measure. They file a revised measure with the clerk. At that point, you can engage in the process to come up with a draft title, because they may have taken things out. They may have whatever. They may have added certain pieces that were suggested by the review and comment process. And at that point, you've actually got the measure, and you can come up with a draft title that allows for comment on something that is potentially going to go to the signature gathering phase and ultimately on the ballot. But to have, as paragraph B suggests, have a draft created at the review and comment phase means that you are creating, in my view, make work for city employees who are probably already overworked and don't need to engage in this particular task at this particular point. That's all I'm suggesting.
That makes sense.
Give yourselves a break.
Thank you, Mr. Gruskin. Any comments or any additional questions regarding this one? Ms. Ozels?
Just commenting that I really appreciate this recommendation from your office, and I think that this is the most logical and path of least resistance forward and an elegant solution to the issue. And just thank you.
Clerk O'Malley?
Yeah, I just want to support Mark Gruskin's cadence, the proposed cadence. I think it makes sense. Otherwise, there is going to be additional unnecessary work that would have to take its course that could be unwound and undid, and then you're back at square one again. So I support the cadence that Mark is recommending.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tafoya, your hand is up. as well.
Yeah, thank you, Clerk. I'm in favor of this. You know, the title process has been a challenging one that I've gone back and forth with, and I think that this newer process is better.
Okay, appreciate it. Councilman Black. Excuse me.
I know at our last meeting, we had a very lengthy discussion about this, and some people wanted to talk more about the title board, and I know we also had that discussion on Monday at our Budget and Policy Committee. And so I didn't know if anyone wanted to continue asking questions about that. I just find it interesting that we don't have a lot of discussion today, which is completely fine, but I just wanted to invite anyone to speak up before we move on.
I thought I saw a hand up. Martha Tierney and Miss Tierney, and then Councilman Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. I think this is I'm in favor of this recommendation. I think definitely the process has to change. And I think this creates a process that gives more control so that you don't end up with biased titles or nonsensical titles. And I think the clerk working in conjunction with the city attorney is a good place to land. So I support it.
Thank you. Councilman Flynn.
Forgot to unmute. Thank you. I do think that there is value in having the final setting be done by more than just one party, at least the way I understand the state process. So paragraph B here, this is sort of a halfway in between what we have now and a full-on title setting board. I would be a lot more comfortable with this being on the table if the last sentence included city council legislative staff. So not just the city attorney, in other words, allow for public comment and give final title setting to the clerk working in conjunction with the city attorney and city council staff. I don't think that should be excluded because we are the legislative body.
Thoughts?
Does that recommendation mean was that an inadvertent exclusion? Because right now it says city council staff and the city attorney draft the title, but then it leaves out city council staff at the end.
Let me have Troy chime in on that.
All right.
Well, I would just say, Councilman Flynn, it's difficult to mimic the state because we're not set up and have the same staff as the state. The way the state title board is, as many of us know, is that it's the Secretary of State or his or her designee, the Attorney General, his or her designee. So we're kind of covering that with clerk and city attorney, but the third person on the state board is the director of the Office of Legislative Legal Services, which is, kind of like their own set of attorneys, which, we don't really have something like that at the local level. All we have mentioned in the charter and code is the city attorney's office. And, we obviously represent all the departments, council and the clerk and all of the departments. So we don't really have that kind of person. And also just on a more fundamental nature, with the right of initiative being the first right reserved to the people, that it can be problematic to have, potentially, and I'd love to hear discussion on this, but to have legislative or political involvement in something like a title setting. I think the way the state title board is set up is to be more nonpartisan legislative staff. So, and I know that council has recently created the council director position in code, so that that could be something that's leaned to, but council just doesn't have the kind of staff agencies and support agencies that are represented at the state. So I think that's kind of part of the problem in bringing the state process of the title board to the city. But Just wanted to point that out and love to hear some discussion on it.
Certainly, I mean, with all due respect to Anshul and John and our legislative staff, they are part of the city attorney's office, as are you, and as is the city attorney itself, Kristen, and any of her designees. We are the legislators, so our expertise shouldn't be brushed aside as somehow biased. I'll bring up again the Fair Elections Fund initiative. When it came to council, and we were, in fact, Troy, you were at the table. That's right. Yeah, you were there. This was like 5 legislative councils ago for us, or something like that. I've lost count. But you know how cooperatively we work that. And what we did was we sat down with and we went through all the issues, and here's how the city disperses funds. That's why this language won't work. We need to change it. And it worked out really well. So anyway, I would not concede the point that there's a political bias there, especially if it were, I'm thinking back to people like John Bennett, right? Totally an expert. David, you would probably second that. So I think we should definitely be part of the final title setting. That would make me more comfortable with this.
I want to call on Councilman Black and then Councilman Sawyer.
I'm just going to share something interesting that Councilwoman Kanich brought up on Monday. She suggested that perhaps the draft should come from the proponents because they are the experts on it. So I don't know if that was something that this group wanted to talk about, somehow incorporating that idea into it also, but I just wanted to throw it out as an idea.
I didn't know if maybe, I appreciate that, Councilman Black, and I do remember that comment. Mr. Gruskin, or wait, I think you have Councilman Sawyer. Yeah,
That's okay. I had a separate question. So if Mr. Gruskin wants to respond to that, please go ahead, and then I'll take my turn.
Thank you, Councilman.
So one of the things that hasn't been addressed, we're talking about who's going to set this title. Is this the title for the petition? And we're retaining the ability of the council to set the ballot title if there are sufficient signatures? Or is this a title that's going to, because that's what happens in Colorado Springs with their title board. The title board sets a petition title. People go out, they gather signatures. If the signatures are sufficient, it comes to council. Council can, as you can, adopt the ordinance or refer it to the people. And in the referral process, they set the ballot title just as you're entitled to do right now. Alternatively, at the state level, the ballot title that is set for the petitions is also the one that ends up on the ballot. So I understand we're kind of jockeying over who's got the expertise and who ought to be involved. But do we know what we're creating? And should we be clear about that before we decide who it is that's creating? As to the suggestion about letting the proponents come up with their own title, I'm sure there is some scenario where that's ended up well. I can't imagine that would be a preferable position for purposes of having a fair, non-misleading title, which isn't to say that the proponents can't weigh in, and they should weigh in the title setting process. But to allow them to kind of get the train going is probably not going to foster neutral, informative titles for the elected.
Councilwoman, can I go to Ben, because I know he's going to answer that question, if that's okay. Thank you. Ben?
And I'll be brief. Just to answer Mark's question with regard to, what is the title? The title under our proposal and the way that Troy drafted it, the title is both the title on the petition and the title on the ballot. So it's very much like the state process under our proposal, which would be that title is set before you circulate petitions so that the people who are signing the petition see the exact same thing. as the folks who are voting on it will see on their ballot. And then just to I guess agree with Mark also on the proponents drafting the title, I think that kind of puts us where we are now. The sophistication, the number of times that proponents come back to the city differs, and sometimes you have folks who submit to you a super clean title, and even in that case, under our current process, we end up going a few rounds with folks in order to make sure that we're following the guardrails that are set up already. And so I would just agree that I think that with the comment period that we've provided in our proposal that would allow proponents to give us specific comments about why the initial drafted title doesn't fit what their perception of what the title should be is, that I think that that's a good way to deal with that. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Sawyer, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No worries. And want to just say I agree 100% with what Ben just said. I have zero problem and I'm fully supportive of that. I think it's a good solution to the challenges that we're trying to fix here. I do think that Councilman Flynn has a really important point when it comes to the recommendation under B of whether a city council representative should be at the table in the conversation at the final title setting. Councilwoman Black asked our central staff to prepare a chart that she showed in committee on Monday when we had a little bit of a conversation about this. And it was a really interesting chart of information about how things are done in many other cities, peer cities, as well as cities within the state of Colorado. Just wondering if it would be okay for her to pull that up. I think it would be a valuable just addition to the conversation for the public to be able to see that information if they weren't able to chime in or watch Monday's Budget and Policy Committee. But I think it's a helpful visual when it comes to kind of this conversation.
Absolutely. Ma'am, if you have that chart ready, I'm not sure if you can take control and put it up or if I have to pull this down.
I'm not sure if I can take the wheel either. Councilwoman Black, do you have that chart on hand by any chance?
Yeah, I can do it. I'm going to unshare you, Audrey.
Sure.
And then here it is. Can everybody see that?
Would you mind just making it a little bit bigger? Do not currently have my reading glasses on. Thank you. I appreciate it. So the chart was, you know what you can do, Councilwoman Black, is down on the right-hand side, there's like a bar and it says 100% and you can just move it.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and yep, there you go. And it should. And just so everyone is kind of aware, I just mentioned it, but just of what we're looking at here, it was just a request to kind of level set by looking at what both other cities nationwide that we consider to be peer cities and other cities within the state of Colorado, kind of who does the title setting process. And so while I don't think that city council should be a sole setter, and I absolutely think that the clerk's office should be setting the title and going through this, I do think that kind of based on the information that we're seeing here, and of course I understand, we're a home rule city and county, we can make our own choices, but I do think that based on the legislative branch being involved in many of these other cities and in many of these in the discussion that we've talked about here, many of the parts of the conversation, and given the fact that unlike the city of Denver is nonpartisan. So, some of the conversation that has come up around the partisan issues is really not something that the city faces in the same way that the state does and that state title setting board does. But thanks for pulling this up. I do think it's just a really good visual and an important part of the conversation to take a look at, what other legislative bodies have sole control over title setting. And that's not something I think that's being proposed here, and fully support that. But I do think that city council should have a representative based on the fact that we are nonpartisan legislative body of the city and county of Denver. So thanks for pulling that up. Really appreciate it. And we'll open it up to other comments or thoughts based on that. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll stop sharing.
Okay, thank you, Councilman Sawyer. And I think one of the things I wasn't able to attend that meeting, but I did give it a scope over. One of the things that I want to make sure that's clear from our office is that we are bipartisan, we are multi-partisan, and that's the beauty of what we do in our office, and that's the transparency in our office, is that there's Democrats, there's unaffiliated, there's Republicans, and the magic and the security of it is that we all work together in that office to make these elections fair and ensure that that transparency is there. When we look at title setting, and when we look at measures that go on and off, where we say nonpartisan, where we say, and I think a lot of folks I've heard a lot of misunderstandings of that point, and I just want to be clear. For us, we have no dog in that fight. We don't opine on what's on the ballot. And it sucks because I used to love to have to be able to endorse folks, but I can't do that anymore, especially if they're on the Denver ballot, or if there's anything that has to do with that. Even when it comes to our own proposals that came out of our office to expand, to basically equalize our office to the other independent agencies where they have 5 appointees, and then of course the mayor has 50 appointees, but we're not trying to do that. Even that measure, you never heard us say a thing about it once it became an actual measure and on the ballot. And that's just to make sure that fairness is baked into it. We work in consultation with the CAO. Now, I could see an idea perhaps floating around. We work in consultation with city council staff. And that's why we have that. We kind of, as Kevin put it, we kind of put in and we kind of moved it a little bit so that instead of just at the review and comment phase, all we're doing is, and I remember sitting in our review and comment phase, and Mr. Browder, I don't know if you remember this, but it was the impound initiative proponents bringing their crazy initiative out. And I couldn't say, we didn't make a decision. We just sat there and we listened. And Mr. Broadwell kind of gave them a free law school lesson on how they're going to violate the Constitution. That was theirs to take or not. We really couldn't do anything with title drafting. We couldn't touch it. This one would have, the recommendation that is in front of you would have that draft title created by city council staff and the city attorney at that review and comment phase. It would allow for some public comment. And because that's what we also heard too, because a lot of folks were chiming in on a couple of those issues, and they were really putting us over the coals, or raking us over the coals, because there was no opportunity for written public comment to come in, and we actually took the brunt of that. We do think maybe we should allow that part. We could allow that to take place. It's not public comment like you would see like at a council meeting or anything like that. It's that written public comment on those titles. And then that final setting would be my office working with the city attorney's office. It's a very, very boring and non-active process. It was really a nothing burger until this last time around, where you had one of those two competing measures. And so, it really is not an exciting process at all. And maybe Clerk O'Malley can speak to that as well in your time. But I know that my director, Dina Dawson, also has something to say. And also, I know that we're running out on time, so I want to make sure that if folks are okay to go over just a little bit so we can kind of wrap it up in a good way. Ms. Dawson?
Oh, hi, sorry, Clerk. I don't have anything to add.
Okay,
Thank you.
Clerk O'Malley?
I just had the same question that Jenna had relative to the chart, which is, what do those other 18 jurisdictions charters say about where the responsibility for election matters rest? Because our charter, I agree, it's very clear that it says it shall be vested exclusively in and exercised by the clerk and recorder. So what are the charters saying about that?
I don't have that information.
Well, I think that's an important question, though. Given, where the clerk's responsibility vests and where it lies. And I think that needs to be considered.
Councilwoman Sawyer, your hand is up.
Yep, thanks. I just wanted to respond to that, and I put it in the chat. So the Colorado State Constitution assigns title setting to the legislative body in the absence of a clear charter direction. I think there is some question about what that would look like in the city of Denver, and ensuring that there is a very specific, very clear to our residents and our voters, neutral party. And so I believe it was Councilman Flynn who made the metaphor of a three-legged stool, that you know, in order to ensure neutrality across the board, that for our voters, that you know, three different sorts of a three-legged stool of some kind. The question being, you know, exactly what that would look like is what we're discussing now, but that would ensure a nonpartisan, non-fair process. And so just to answer your questions, when it comes to those cities, I'm not 100%, the sister cities, I'm not 100% sure that anyone has that information, but I do know the Colorado Constitution assigns that title setting responsibility to the legislative body. So many of those Colorado cities are assigned that responsibility via the Colorado Constitution.
Thank you, Councilwoman. And just to follow up on that, we're really well aware of that language in the Colorado Constitution. In the absence of that clear direction, our charter is very clear. And that's why we, you know, our recommendation, you know, continues to vest that in our office as the final. But I think, you know, we can definitely have that conversation as we move forward. I do know that we're running up on time, and I want to make sure that we have opportunity for that public comment. So as we did with the other two charter amendments, and folks, you have the ordinances right there in front of you, and that's a lot of the things, you know, we'll send the slide deck to you all. What I'd like to do is, you know, kind of gauge a temperature with this particular question on the, since we're wrapping up the charter amendment portions of it. And then what I would like to do is to make sure that, you know, members, what we did in the last iteration of this, which was the Election Modernization Committee, was we required like maybe not even a one pager. If you want to go beyond one page, great. We don't really want too much of a hardcore analysis. That's on you, but a little something, you know, recommendations from each one of you as BAM committee members would be very helpful if you can send those in, so we can gather your thoughts, so you have that opportunity to kind of go through the slide deck, go through the language, go through the recommendations, and then having your input in every single one of these things. And if there's some things that you're just they're absolutely okay with, just indicate so. And we look forward to getting that from you all so that we can have those formal recommendations. Is there any, do you want to take a temperature on the previous one, Audrey? And then we can go to.
Sure. Let me scroll back to it. Hold on a second. Here we go. What did we want to do? Record dissent, or more like people asking for more information? What would you like?
I think if we record dissent, or either or would be good. I mean, hands up.
Clerk, I would dissent from it to the extent that if this version were to be your recommendation, I would dissent from it to the extent that it does not include a legislative analyst as part of the final title setting, just as to be part of that stable three-legged stool.
Okay.
Thanks.
As it's written right here. Okay. Should we do just hands up like we did last time?
Can I jump in really quickly? Wanted to just clarify, I apologize. I said the Colorado Constitution when I was saying where the information for this legislative ability to set titles, and I apologize, I was misremembering from Monday. It's actually in Colorado state statute, so it's still from the state. I just wanted to be very clear that it's not constitutional, it is state statute that sets that. So apologies, and wanted to be sure that I clarified that for everybody. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, ma'am.
All right. So do we want to just do a hands up on the recommendation?
Is that support?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that with Mark's revision to be, or as is?
That's a great question. I think, Clerk, I don't want to speak for you, but I think Ben and I are sitting here nodding along with Mr. Grooveskin, and we would recommend his changes as well.
Yeah, I think it's.
So that's what we're voting up on?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for that clarification. That's what I thought I was voting to support. So
Thank you.
Is that everybody? Okay. Can we go to our public comment portion?
Yes. Amelia, are you there to lead us through?
So we have one speaker.
Yes, Brian Loma has signed up. So if he is here, we can give him the floor.
Can anyone see him in the audience portion?
No, well, I can't. It's in the audience push. Thank you, Sky. I'm sorry. Mr. Loma, are you there? Can you hear us?
I see Ian's hand is up.
That was left over from voting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All right, sorry. I can't. Amelia, are we able to plug him in or?
Okay, it looks like he didn't join the meeting, or he left early. One of those.
What's that?
So I think I will personally reach out to him and see if we can get something in writing, and I'd be happy to disseminate that to the group.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect. So BAM members, thank you so much. Thank you for your service, and thank you for participating in this, for your input, for your expertise. It's good to see some of you and be able to be in the same Zoom meeting as with you, but at the same time, I really appreciate, and at the same time, I really appreciate it. Councilman Black, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add as the co-chair, but folks, like I said, we'll follow up with an email. We'll send you, make sure the slide deck and have your written kind of recommendations coming back in your input as you kind of process everything through would be really helpful.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you also, and know that council's meeting 4 more times about these topics. And so if you have other ideas, suggestions, please send them our way, and I will be sure to offer ideas to council members.
Perfect. Ian, your hands back up.
Yeah, well, I was just wondering if there was a calendar for that already set, or if we should just be watching the agenda.
We can probably send that to
Yeah, the meetings have been scheduled for 6 months, so they're really the next Mondays, except for it's not Memorial Day week, and then it's not June 13th, I think, but otherwise it's the next 4 Mondays, minus those 2.
Councilwoman, I know that you had in an email that we had going back and forth. I know you kind of put the dates on an email.
Yeah.
Could you do that for the BAM members and maybe send that to the list so that they are aware of the dates and when these discussions will be happening?
Sure.
Thank you.
And then if I may, I want to reiterate that we would love to hear other thoughts on the recommendations and the drafts that we've put together. We can tinker endlessly, and I look forward to hearing your perspectives and continuing to work this through. So send me anything. I'll read it all. I promise. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Can I clarify one thing? I'm sorry. I don't think I was clear. I know a bunch of people already left, but we have our budget and policy discussions, but we don't actually move any legislation forward. So that's just discussion. And then we may agree on legislation, and then that would go through the Finance and Governance Committee. So the budget and policies are just discussion groups. But I will send the dates.
Thank you.
Clerk, I think the only thing I would add is thank you for organizing this and for having us be members of a committee that has probably the coolest name I've ever served on. BAM, right?
BAM.
It's a lot cooler acronym than most other committees I serve on. So.
I used to have a committee in NCBR, and it was terrible. Kendra, co-chair, is also my partner in organizing these. It's been a long process. Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care.